This is a replay from a prior episode.
Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
So every once in a while, I get to catch up with old friends and see what's up in their world. And I've been wanting to catch up with this guy for a minute. His name is Jonny McCoy. And Jonny joins me to discuss the White Flag app, which, by the way, I've downloaded. It's on my phone. I've yet to use it, though. I'm not going to lie, Jonny, only because, I don't know, I guess I've been in a good headspace lately, and I talk to a therapist routinely, but I like knowing that it's there. So without further ado, Jonny McCoy, tell us about the White Flag app and how you came to realize the need for it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Ron. It's good to talk to you again. We're social media buddies in that we keep up with each other through social media and your podcast. And, we just started our podcast on the White Flag app.
Oh, cool.
It's called White Flag Warriors. And in the first 3 episodes have been my story, which I'll kind of, do a little succinct story here for you to kind of let your listeners understand how the White Flag app came to be. But you can hear the full story on the White Flag Warriors on any podcast channels. But basically, man, I'm just like a typical person. I was born into a family of mentally ill parents who did not, and still to this moment, don't consider themselves mentally ill. My father witnessed his grandfather take his own life in this pain in front of him when he was a little boy. He was 12 years old and was going over to visit my grandfather, who was living alone, just got through a divorce. And he discovered him in his bed with a note in his hand. And the saddest part was the whole thing, that not only did my grandfather know that my dad was coming, so he knew who was going to find him, but my dad was sworn to secrecy, told never to talk about it. They called it a heart attack at the funeral. And so he never had any treatment. I'm sure that there was some more things that happened to him growing up. And then my mom was molested as a child, lost her father early. And the mom was kind of absent, and 7 brothers and sisters, big Catholic family. Then they meet in the 70s at Disney, kind of working their way up in the service industry. And they got married and had 3 little boys. And when you don't try to fix your own issues, what you don't transform, you transmit. And they transmitted all that stuff through their veins, through their bodies, through their minds into us. And I was born with generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder and some of these other issues. They just called me their worrier. So this is our nervous son. I had some very serious mental health issues growing up. And then one day my dad hit my mom in the face with a bottle, and watching my father be arrested and my mom, being mangled in the face, it really did something to me. And most importantly, it made me realize that, I was a little bit worse off than we thought. The problem was my family, they never got me any treatment for it because they didn't know anything better. And so I just kind of went on with life. And then the next thing you know, my mom becomes a full-blown alcoholic. She's abusive to me. Then I leave for college. I find out I have Crohn's disease in college. And then, as one of those like hyper independent people, I went to law school and highest educated person in the history of my family. And I have all these anxious issues about, the police and watching my dad get arrested. And, that's not something that you want to happen to you. And then one fateful evening in downtown Columbia, I was falsely arrested for asking these police officers why they were arresting my friend, and to teach us a lesson for saying that we were attorneys, which we were. They shifted us to general population by not turning our paperwork in on time. And during that elongated stay, I witnessed somebody take their own life. So I witnessed a suicide as well while I was in jail. And I can't tell you, man, like most people will tell you, when you have panic issues, getting away, moving out of that area, wherever you are, going outside, breathing, just removing yourself from the trauma, from the danger, is what you need. And for me, I was locked in a jail cell. The guy was like right there in front of me for hours on end. It was a crime scene. And turns out that the officers lied on their incident report to justify my arrest. It became like this, this my word versus theirs. I found a hidden surveillance video. Video went viral before viral was happening. lawsuit, it reaches the headlines, and the next thing you know, I'm in a battle versus the city of Columbia over whether or not I was right or they were right. And it went on for 4 years, and it was bad. It was nasty. I ended up winning $300,000 the day before the trial started. The day they said that they didn't do anything, the day they said they did something wrong was the day they slid the check across the table.
Yeah.
So I witnessed, horrific from a personal standpoint, not from like reading it in a book, what people go through, what defendants go through, what plaintiffs go through. And so I took every dollar of that money. I was working insurance defense at the time, but I took all that money and I put it into my own law firm.
Right.
And so I started doing criminal law and civil rights law. And, I was hammering them in the courtroom because I had the ability and the necessity to call people out when they were lying. And in the South, it's just not something you see in the courtroom, man.
No.
You'll see, attorneys, and they'll be like, well, I got to work with this guy. I have thousands of cases with him. I'm not going to call him out on this. And I did. And at first there was a lot of pushback. I got a lot of threats. I was told, this isn't an area that you need to be practicing law in, one of the most conservative areas in the most conservative state in the union. And then eventually, after I, kept winning over and over again, eventually the word just got out. All right, don't lie, or this guy's going to call you out on it, And so,
heaven forbid, in our justice system, right?
Yeah, and so I started getting a bigger name, and then eventually I started getting phone calls for really high profile cases because they knew I didn't give a damn. I would call you out. So I got hired on the Julian Benton case where my client was shot at 29 times, hit 9 times, point blank range, 8 feet away, maybe even closer, over $100 worth of marijuana. The whole thing admitted was over $100 marijuana sale. And my client allegedly sold the $100 worth of marijuana to a 100% mentally disabled military veteran who needed it to sleep.
Right.
They kicked this guy's door down middle of the afternoon while school buses were driving around, unloaded 29 shots into this guy's house. 9 of them hit him. He survives. And they turned off all their body cameras, same as in my case. And guess what? Another hidden surveillance video. This one showed that the officer didn't knock. They didn't announce. They weren't wearing police clothing. So long story short, we end up settling that case for a state record $11.2 million in 2020. And this was right before George Floyd. So that was also right before COVID. So now I got this, I got this momentum. We got a big attorney fee, and then COVID hit, and my mental health, kind of like everybody else's, took a plunge.
Right.
It had already been bad. I had PTSD, generalized anxiety, all the stuff that I had gone through, but I was also on Xanax. And so long story short, I said, well, I'm not changing anything. All I'm doing is winning for my clients. Nothing was being changed. The officers in the Julian Benton case still work there. They still signed sworn affidavits. The judge found them to have committed perjury. These guys didn't even get a day off. They didn't even get a public reprimand, nothing. And so I asked for one around the time of the George Floyd. I said, is there any way that the city of Myrtle Beach or any of these other surrounding municipalities that had officers involved are going to admonish publicly? And they said, no, you got your check. That's all you need. And I said, all right, well, if I'm not making any change in the justice system, all I'm doing is helping my clients get their own personal justice, but I'm not changing anything. I need to do something that has more of an effect on the world. And so from my own issues, my own suicide attempts in 2018, my own struggle with finding somebody to talk to, I realized that there wasn't anything out there. And so I created a way for you to instantly and anonymously connect with somebody else who's going through the same things as you. Yeah. That's all a White Flag is. It's an app. It's a free app in the App Store, and it's what I needed during all this struggle, all the stuff you just heard about. The only thing I ever needed to hear was from somebody else to say, I've gone through what you went through. I made it out. You can do this. Because when you go to a therapist, like you just talked about, they don't say that. They read through the book and they say, hey, this is what, could have, blah, blah, blah. But when I got into treatment and I finally got with a roommate who was walking me through what it was like to withdraw from Xanax, walked me through what it was like to have, these nightmares and cope with them the next day, and then for him to be able to tell me, look, I know exactly what you're going through. The amount of times that you think about suicide, the amount of times where you think you can't make it. I went through the same thing. I'm here. And so that was the best medicine for me. And I thought that would be the best way to spend the money from the civil rights cases, was to just flat out, create something where people can find each other. And so that's what we got. That's where we're at now. Is all my time and attention is devoted to the White Flag app and connecting the world. And we hit a viral video on TikTok last week or 2 weeks ago, and we ended up with 25,000 downloads from that one video.
Nice.
So people are responding. They like it. They think it's a good idea. And one of my favorite reviews in the App Store is my why. And it reads, "You have no idea what this app means to me. It's the only reason I'm still here."
Wow.
And those are the type of the feedback and the kind of reviews that keep me going, even though I still struggle. I'm on antipsychotics. I'm one of the best lawyers, people will tell you, in the state of South Carolina. And I guarantee you, I'm the only one that admits that I struggle with my mental health and I'm on antipsychotics and blah, blah, blah.
And
but I'm also still great.
That's an important note too. I was just going to sit here and tell people, for those who don't know, Johnny is an affable, good-looking fella. He's got his own law firm. I mean, you are on the outside the definition of success, and you've got a lovely wife. You've got on the outside what appears to be this fantastic life, and it's a lesson for us all to learn that what looks good on the outside, what we think looks fantastic on the outside, may not always be as fantastic on the inside for that individual. And so hearing people out and listening to their story and understanding that everyone has their own struggles, whether we know it or not, it's important to acknowledge.
No, people talk about in the stigma and, I need to be in the fight. And my favorite is the reach out to me. If everybody needs to know that you can reach out to me. If you guys really want to make a difference, if you really want to make a change, I'm going to tell you the only way to do it, or the most efficient way, is to make the biggest impact. And that is sharing your own story.
Yeah.
With your wife, with your son, even if you don't have quote unquote mental health issues.
Yeah.
You need to talk about the time where you couldn't get out of bed for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
You need to talk about the time where you lost somebody and what grief felt like to you. You need to talk about the time where you like just the casual stuff that we all feel. But the people who talk about the things that are really difficult, like me, the past suicide attempt, trouble with addiction, trouble with alcohol, and you see me on the Today Show, you see me winning cases in the courtroom that are life without parole, people's lives are in my hands. You see that somebody's capable of doing these things and of being quote unquote mentally ill. That's the only way out of this thing. The reason that they're so afraid to talk to you and to everybody else and even mention what's going on with them is they're afraid of being shunned by society or locked up for 3 days.
Yeah. And
the only way that we're going to beat this thing is if you guys start talking. So if you might cringe by hearing a guy who's a founder of a startup that people rave about, that's got this incredible, record in the courtroom and this good story and, all this other stuff. But I want you to, when you think about and you hear these things from me, I want you to remember this was done by somebody who was extremely mentally ill.
Right.
I don't care what you say. I've been, going through my mental health issues and being to where I am today. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm comfortable with you saying, I heard from a guy who's very mentally ill, who's doing great professionally. I mean, it's just like it's if I had cancer.
Yeah.
And I was doing great. You wouldn't be like, oh my Lord, like how is he doing this? Well, you would just be like applauding the entire time because people are able to function normally, quote unquote, while they're dealing with deadly diseases, which is what mental illness is, which is what cancer is. And it should all be treated uniformly. I mean, I didn't do anything to acquire PTSD. I was born with it. And then my surroundings happened and made it worse. So, why should I be so ashamed? Why should I be so embarrassed? The people who hurt me damn sure aren't embarrassed.
More with Jonny McCoy, founder of the White Flag app, and the Ron Show returns.
The way I describe it for people is my dad shot himself and the bullet hit everyone in his life. It was a week before my 30th birthday, and I had this impulse to call him, but I didn't because I thought I could call him later that week.
65 Americans a day die by gun suicide. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn more at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by Brady and the Ad Council.
This is a replay from a prior episode. Welcome back to The Ron Show. We're with my good friend Jonny McCoy, founder of the White Flag app. Let me tell you what I love about White Flag. First of all, in a country where medical bills lead to bankruptcies, and that in and of itself causes its own mental struggles, this is something that anyone who needs it can obtain it, and there's no cost involved for it. And that's something that I find particularly pleasing and want to shout from the top of mountains and rooftops. Download this app, log in, sign yourself up, answer a few questions, and you're set if and when you ever need it. And you never have to worry about the cost. The cost is what keeps people from going to seek preventative medical care and preventative mental health care as well.
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. And, it's not, you said it perfectly, because it's 24/7. There are very, very little hurdles for you to have to get on the app and begin talking with somebody. And after all of the stuff that I've been through, all the treatments, all the options, talking has been the most beneficial thing to me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're talking to a therapist, a psychiatrist, a physician, or somebody else who's been through it. That's called peer support. Yeah. What matters is that you start your journey and you just start, having these conversations. And on White Flag, you don't have to jump straight in and say, I'm struggling with this, this, and this. You can go talk to somebody else who's saying, I'm struggling with this, this, and this, and you can just be there to support them, learning about their issues while you in turn learn about your own yourself until you're ready to start talking about your stuff more intimately. But the truth is, people who are struggling with mental illness are incredibly lonely. I mean, most people are just lonely in general, right? But people with mental illness are incredibly lonely. 24 hours a day. You can anonymously get on White Flag and have a real conversation with a real person who needs it, who needs to hear from you, who needs to know that there's empathy in other people out there. You don't just have to be related to them. You don't have to be paid. You don't have to be trained. It's true. It's within us. And it's what makes us separate from the rest of the species on this planet, is that we do things for each other without anything expected in return. And it feels great. It helps us. But that's not why we do it. There's some sort of internal longing to be there for each other. And that White Flag provides you the space to do that. So if you're out there and you want to know how I can get in the fight, you want to know how I can, help truly combat the crisis, White Flag's on the front line. Just sign on. You don't got to put your real name in there, just an anonymous username. You don't have to put your address or anything crazy like that. And you can immediately begin, combating the crisis by being there for somebody else.
Let me ask you this, Jonny, though. If I have, some big pocketed donor who wants to say, I really want to get behind this, I'd like to support it in some kind of way. Does that avenue exist, or is there any way that, folks can?
Yeah. So the best thing for you to do if you want to, be along the journey, along the way, is to follow our social media for different ways where you can participate, whether we're going to end up doing crowdfunding here soon, or, whether we announce a fundraise or whatnot. But yeah, no, that's a great question. I appreciate it. The best way to do that is to just kind of follow us on our social media for updates.
Okay. All right. And how to, what's your, give us your social media handles for those who don't.
Yeah. So we're everywhere at White Flag app, APP. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we post daily on every channel, Facebook, Twitter, we're even on LinkedIn, because people are in those places and it's people that are struggling with mental illness and need this. So we go where everybody is. Follow us along at White Flag app. Our podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's a more involved conversation about my mental health, about our users' mental health, some of our team members. We're going to talk about ketamine on there. We're going to talk about mushrooms, all things that I tried during my journey. So follow along with the White Flag Warriors podcast as well.
That's good stuff, man. Well, listen, Jonny, it's good to catch up with you. I'm sorry we haven't done this a whole lot sooner. I love you, brother, and I wish you all the best.
Man. Well, Ron, you've always, I don't know if your users know this, but you have always been real. And that's what everybody, that's what they say they like about me is, I got the whole spar, but, I've always appreciated that you've kept it real, not only with your users, even in Myrtle Beach. You bring us along on your journey, and you're just a wonderful person. I'm glad to call you a friend, man.
Same here, buddy. Thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely, of course.
Hi, this is Ron Roberts, host of The Ron Show, heard weekday afternoons here on America One Radio. I'm also Ron Roberts, Metro Atlanta realtor with eXp Realty. In political commentary, the art of persuasion, backed by facts and data, make a compelling case. That's the goal of my show, but it's also the goal when my clients come to me to help them list and sell their home. Not only do I have the experience in selling Atlanta homes for top dollar and on or before deadline, I now have the certification to back it up. That's right. You're listening to a certified listing professional. That means I'm accredited and knowledgeable at the task of prepping, pricing, listing, marketing, and negotiating in the sale of your house for the money you seek in the time frame you need it. The best part is you pay me nothing until the home is sold, and you'll enjoy decades of persuasive marketing know-how, listing photos, videos, and as many or as little in-person tours of your place to best accommodate your busy schedule and family's plans. Got questions? Let's talk. Call 404-919-2725 or visit rononthereal.com. Ron Roberts with eXp Realty, Georgia MLS 396720. This is a replay from a prior episode.
This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
All right, welcome back. I am excited to have this lady on. Ever since I read her piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution last week, I put a little note to the side and I said, reach out to her. Let's get her on. Welcome to the show, Chitra Ragavan. Did I say your name right?
You said it perfectly. Thanks for having me on, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, it's my understanding that you are not only a former journalist, but now you're an executive coach to a lot of CEOs and C-suite executives. First of all, explain to me what a C-suite executive is, because I don't know if I may have been one at some point in time.
Well, a chief strategy officer, a chief communications officer, the leadership team that typically reports to the CEO and is responsible for setting the tone and agenda and the goals for an organization or a company.
Okay, so having been a former radio station manager and a senior vice president of programming for a cluster of radio, I feel like I may have fallen into that realm at some point in time. And I'd like to think, looking back, that I took that position and those roles in particular to heart. I always tried to live by the golden rule, as most folks say they would, and as much as possible. But let's dive into this conversation and hope that even I come away learning something about it. I want to start with some points that you made in this opinion piece. And by the way, did the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? How did this writing come together?
Well, I actually reached out to them. And the reason I wrote this op-ed is, just for a little bit of background, is as soon as I first read about Fani Willis, I was instantly sitting up and paying attention, both professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. So professionally, I was paying attention. As you mentioned, I was a former reporter for NPR and U.S. News and World Report. I covered legal affairs. I'm now an executive leadership coach. I'm also a brand and narrative strategist. And so I was taken with Miss Willis. And because I knew that she had both an important mission and B, a compelling narrative, right? Because even as many Republican leaders were cowering, right, before Donald Trump, here was this little known Black female state prosecutor from Georgia, essentially standing up to a dangerous bully. So she captured my imagination, as she did, I think, for many professional women around the world. And I put her on my radar screen because I knew that she was definitely someone to watch as a rising leader. And personally, I was paying attention because, as you know, I was born in India and I came to the United States actually as a graduate student at the University of Georgia back in the day.
Oh, dogs.
So I've kept an eye on Georgia politics ever since. And I invited Willis to appear on my leadership podcast called When It Mattered. And that interview didn't work out. This was about a year ago, but I have followed her career closely ever since. And of course, came that big fall, and it was a hard fall, and it caught my attention as a leadership coach because I think it epitomizes in part this uphill battle that dominant and ambitious women leaders often face. And my last point is, Ron, that it's also a reminder to powerful female leaders like Willis that they have to be doubly cautious in their conduct so as not to invite this type of ugly scrutiny. And she clearly wasn't cautious enough.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've personally been on this roller coaster ride throughout this entire process. And when the allegations from the Trump team's defense counsel started coming out, I felt like the roller coaster really started taking steep turns and climbs and falls. And we're all just kind of breathless with each passing headline and starting to get a little exhausted from the ride. Like, I think I want to get off. But,
I know how you feel.
Yeah, when I read the piece at first, I thought going into this, like, okay, this is going to be a defense of Fani Willis, and no, I think you were very fair and somewhat in a maternalistic sort of way, sort of stern with Fani and women in general.
Yeah, definitely. I did get a little bit of heat about that because, people are very protective of her.
Sure.
Because she has risen to this level through probably some incredibly hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, as I said in my piece, when you are in that position, you really have to be careful. And you can't make those types of mistakes. And she definitely made an ethical mistake, right? Because perception is reality, as I said. And, even if she didn't feel like she was doing something wrong, just the impression it was conveying, this kind of potential quid pro quo, the romantic entanglement. I mean, it was just, she obviously didn't put herself under the same kind of scrutiny that she would have any of her witnesses, for instance. And I think also, in addition to the ethical lapse, there was this tactical mistake because she was taking on somebody incredibly powerful who is a street fighter.
Yeah.
And in doing so, she should have said, is there anything I need to be worried about myself, my team, and really been careful about what she was doing.
You're right. I've said from the start that this office needed to act as if they were a pack of nuns. Nuns and priests and fly right and do right and be Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and be squeaky clean about it because, as you said, they're taking on a thug and a band of thugs and enablers and are going to use any opportunity to do exactly what they're doing, which is, I don't think necessarily to derail a case, but to delay it long enough that it comes after election, after he's sworn into office, and then we're waiting 4 more years, potentially, if that were to come. And then all of this work is for naught. But I didn't necessarily so much want to talk with you about the case. I wanted to drill in on your perception writing this as a woman to a woman and for other women as well. We both know that African-American parents usually have the talk with their kids when it comes to interactions with law enforcement. I am a gay male. Obviously, most gay folks aren't raised by gay folks, so we don't get to have that same kind of talk. But I'm wondering, do mothers have this sort of talk with their daughters all the time, or is this just something that a mother who realizes their daughter is going to be driven and ambitious needs to sit down and have a conversation with them about?
I think that mothers and fathers, right? There are so many progressive men in this world, in this country, who are very concerned about their daughters and put enormous effort into making sure that they survive in the world and thrive in the world. So I think it's definitely a conversation that moms and dads need to have with their daughters. And so I wouldn't just say it's moms. And I happen to have 2 sons, weirdly, so I haven't had to have that. I have different conversations with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's some really interesting things that women should be made aware of. Really interesting studies, and I could talk a little bit about that. I mentioned one of them in my piece, and this is sobering, but it's a conversation that must be had so that women can be tactical and be able to navigate, as you know so well put it, these minefields that confront especially senior executive women, but women of all stripes, basically. So in my op-ed, I mentioned this one study that underscores these pervasive biases that women face in professional daily settings, where networking and assertiveness are often viewed differently based on gender. And this was a University of Michigan and Carnegie Mellon research study. And it showed that while men benefit from networking with high status people, women actually lose status in the eyes of their colleagues and damage their careers because they are perceived as self-serving and not benevolent, unless they couch it in those terms, unless they say, oh, I'm networking with this powerful person for the good of the organization, for this team. But if they're perceived at all as doing it for themselves, then they really suffer. And so the authors concluded that people typically don't like dominant and ambitious female leaders. And can you imagine that in this day and age, that there still is this pervasive belief, right?
Well, I think we see this in so many subsets. I mean, I think back to being a kid watching Larry Hagman on Dallas and his role, and then I think back to the role that I can't think of her name, Melrose Place, the boss. I'm drawing a blank, but you know, she was, the word bitch was hurled around a lot, not just on the show, but from those who watched it. How she was so tactile and so cold and cutthroat and all these derogatory, adjectives that were hurled at her. And Larry Hagman was seen as like this cunning and deft, but he was no different. And then I think now to what Vice President Kamala Harris deals with, particularly from her ideological opposition, there's always the whispers of how she got to where she is, and none of that comes from a man like Donald Trump, who also has his proclivities when it comes to physical activity and emotional entanglements himself.
Definitely. And it's interesting that you use the word cold, Ron, because that is actually a very important word for women to understand. And I'll explain to you why. Okay. There's all of this landmark research that points to why it is that people typically don't like dominant and ambitious female leaders. And by the way, that's men and women as well. Women don't get a pass on this.
Yes.
And yeah, exactly. And so I want to talk a little bit about this research and the use of your word cold, which is so central to this conversation. Okay. So I had a conversation with my friend Christopher Graves. He's a noted behavioral science expert. He's founder of the company, The Resonance Code. And he pointed me towards some of these studies that have been spearheaded by the legendary psychologist Susan Fiske of Princeton University and others. And what these studies have shown is that we basically access others across two axes. So when I'm meeting you and I'm interacting with you, the two words that I am measuring you on are warmth and competence, okay? Mm-hmm. So warmth is likability and accessibility. Competence includes things like intelligence, efficiency, power, and I kid you not, this goes back to the days of the caveman, which tells you what women are dealing with. Mm-hmm. When in the days of the caveman, the two main questions that caveman was facing when he was staring at caveman B was, A, are you a friend or a foe, which is warmth? And B, if you are a foe, do you have the ability to kill me, which is competence? Mm. So what Graves says, and that Susan Fiske and her colleagues have found, and by the way, these are dozens of studies over the last 40 years, and they have found that these two attributes, warmth and competence, are still hardwired in us today, both in men and women, and it's essentially used to place who you are on some kind of schema. And here's the rub. What they have found is that there is a gender divide on how this warmth competence scale happens, which comes to the detriment of competent women leaders and professionals. Because for women to be perceived as successful, you have to be seen as both warm and competent, but men only have to hit one of those metrics, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to mention one last thing, and then I'd love to get your thoughts. It gets worse because, as Chris Graves pointed out to me, when a man is perceived to be competent, in the absence of further knowledge, he is also deemed to be warm. But for women, it's a zero-sum game. So if women are strong, they are viewed as cold, getting back to your word, and competent, and viewed as incapable of being warm. And the last big gotcha is, so she's like, oh, people don't see me as warm. In order to rise up, I have to be warm and confident. Let me, dial up my warmth. But when she intentionally tries to dial up her warmth, as Hillary Clinton did, as others have done, other women have done, she is then deemed as incompetent. So in other words, you can't make up that gap. It's inversely correlated. And so if you're a woman, it often feels like you just can't win. And it's called the likability trap. And all women have to navigate this in order to be successful.
We're with Chitra Ragavan, a former journalist, podcaster, CEO, coach. Back in just a few on The Ron Show.
My simple solution to the problem was remove people from the scene and help them feel safer.
In response to attacks against Asian Americans, Maddie Park raised over $250,000 to donate cab rides to the Asian community.
There is so much more work to be done. We really need to come together and tackle this issue as a community.
Support the Asian community. Learn how at lovehasnolabels.com. Brought to you by Love Has No Labels and the Ad Council.
This is a replay from a prior episode. We're with Chitra Ragavan, a former journalist, podcaster, CEO, coach. You mentioned Hillary Clinton, and I was thinking while you were having that conversation about the 2016 election cycle, because here you had two candidates. One who wasn't warm, but very competent, probably the most qualified person to run for the office who hadn't had it before. And then you had someone on the other side, a male, who was neither warm nor competent. And yet, I mean, I know it was an electoral college quirk, but it shouldn't have even been that close. How frustrating are outcomes like that for women, knowing that they have to overcome these deficits in perception?
Yes, I'm really glad you mentioned that because, in fact, Hillary Clinton has been the topic of several of these research studies, by the way. And I've got a blog that I'm wrapping up, and I'll have it up in the next couple of hours that lists a lot of these research studies, which I think that your listeners may be interested to read. And Hillary Clinton's and how she was treated is definitely one of them. And in her case, the word cold was very much central to that entire portrayal of her in the news, on the late night talk shows, she's kind of like an icicle. It was just really, and those were just some of the less terrible words that were employed against her. There was so much rage against her, and you can see when you read these studies how she was described in across the spectrum. And so I think that it definitely, and by the way, one of the studies that I will post on my blog post says that female politicians get the worst of it, absolutely the worst of it. And you saw that the most extreme case of that, obviously, which ended in violence, was the Gabby Giffords shooting, right?
Yes.
But even in less serious ways, female politicians have a very, very hard time. Women like Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, and others.
Can I ask, is that just an American situation, or does that happen across the world? Because we do see female political leaders ascend to the top in other countries.
They have risen to the top, but I think these types of biases are inherent. And I think they are across the board, no matter what the culture, in fact, some cultures probably worse than other cultures. But what is surprising is that in our highly progressive culture, and let me just say that women have come an incredibly long way in boardrooms, in media, in all walks of life. So we don't want to not recognize the fact that we have come so far. But really, when you read some of this stuff, you realize how much further we have to go.
I could sit here and dive into that a little bit more, but I want to go back to your opinion piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, because you had some lessons for women in leadership that you wanted to share, and I'll just give the first 4 or 5 points here. You would say, here's what I would say to them. The microscope you will be under as a woman is infinitely more powerful and subjective than your male counterparts, which I think we've covered. Perception is reality. There's no getting around it. Act accordingly. A lesson I think Fani Willis could have learned or should have known from the jump. Listen to your gut. If it feels wrong, it likely is wrong. Please don't do it. And I would like to think that someone as intelligent as Fani Willis and Nathan Wade at this point, let's not just blame the female here, would have had that red flag pop up in their mind. And I'm just surprised if that didn't happen. There are no secrets in the workplace. Word gets around. So if you want to start a love affair with a coworker, assume your colleagues will know. And the last one I want to point to here is acknowledge that your actions will have seismic reactions for your colleagues, their families, their careers, and their paychecks. Do right by them. I keep thinking of Michelle Obama when she let the secret out that the most powerful people in the world are no smarter than you or I. And this comes back to my mind when I look at this entanglement with Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, because I'm utterly shocked that two adults as educated and career-driven as they are, as accomplished as they are, didn't think about the perceptions, didn't think about keeping at least their finances documented. Like, I have a credit card that I use specifically for business purposes because it's easier to keep tabs on these sorts of things. And neither one of them thought that that's what they should do.
Yes, in hindsight, it's really, easy to look at this and say, what were they thinking? But really, if you saw that hearing, right, there was this very emotional period that they were going through, right? There was a breakup. In his mind, she said it was already done. In her mind, it was imminent. So there was this huge well of emotion that I think was underlying all of the stuff, the work that she was doing on the surface. And I'm sure that Wade was feeling the same way. And I think that those decisions were made somehow in that gray zone of probably, a lot of sadness probably, and the idea of lost friendships. And there's a lot of emotion there that she hinted at that really didn't come out but I think that that's the subtext that I got from watching her. There was something going on there under the surface. And it's very easy in a situation like that, by the way. It happens time and time again where somebody wants, in a big case like this, you want someone that you can absolutely trust as your lead prosecutor, as your investigator. And it's tunnel vision where you look at the landscape of lawyers, prosecutors out there, and you go, you know what? This is the only person I can truly trust at this point in time. And it's a compliment to him that despite their breakup, she thought he was the one she could trust with this very important case. But really, if you have to step back and say, you know what, I'm not thinking this properly, there are a lot of talented people out there that could help me, that I could trust. And I think that's where things kind of seemed to go awry.
Yeah, and I think there was the hint of the cancer diagnosis that he was going through as well that sort of complicated it, and it makes you think that there may have been more of an emotional bond than even a physical bond, because that's naturally where we all went. Our minds went to physical entanglement, and we didn't consider the emotional. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. You really hit the nail on the head. It's just there's this emotional drama that was going on that influenced these decisions.
It's unfortunate that we're having to have this conversation because she has a job, a task that is bigger than dealing with being skewered in the public media for her personal life. And I'd like to think that that's not just something that a powerful woman in a role that maybe she didn't expect to find herself in, but has to deal with. Do you feel that some of this or even most or all of this has to do with her just being a woman and maybe even a woman of color?
Not entirely. It's a little bit of everything. I think that it can be true that you can both be targeted as a woman, as a Black woman, as somebody who is going after a very, very big target. Also, to give the defense some credence, they had the right to challenge and to find out whether there was anything improper going on. So it's just how they went about it, I think. The extent to which they were trying to tarnish her. But, one could argue that that's standard legal procedure. That's what they would argue. Yeah. Hey, this is how the legal system works. And we live in a country, we should be proud that we live in a country where we are able to challenge each other in court and let the truth come out.
Yeah.
So I think that is true. And I think it's also true that she did make an ethical lapse in how she handled it. But it's also true that, as she pointed out, she is not on trial. Donald Trump is on trial. She's trying to bring him to justice. And this is part of the smoke and mirrors game. So it can to delay the case, as you said, or maybe derail it if in the best case scenario for him. So I think all of these things are true. They don't have to be, an exception to each other.
When the word perjury came up, I immediately thought about the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal and his impeachment proceedings, and it wasn't so much about the sexual acts or the affair. It was about being able to keep grilling him until they found a way for him to perjure himself. Anyway, that's a conversation for another podcast altogether. Chitra Ragavan, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to give everybody your website. We'll put it in the show notes. It is simply chitraragavan.com. Fascinating stuff that you provided for us today. That op-ed, I enjoyed it so much. We shared that. We'll have that in the show notes as well. And when you get that blog posted, we'll try and put that in the show notes for you as well today. Thank you so much for joining me on The Ron Show.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, that'll do it for today. I want to thank you for listening however you do, whether it's on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, whether you listen via podcast. Follow us at Ron Show ATL on your preferred social media platform. Show notes as well at RonShowATL.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. Have a great day.